you so much, Daria, for the invitation. And also, thank you to James, because you've been outlining the great work that Unite has been carrying out in the UK in our local government and health areas. It's really great that you've also referenced the work that APSI and We Own It do in supporting the work that we do in ensuring that when services do go external to private companies, that we can do all we can to get them insourced. So I'm here to just sort of outline how UNISON members in the UK have campaigned and organised workers to bring services back in-house, that's insourced, and to sort of outline some of the victories that we have secured for a workforce of predominantly low-paid women. And they're delivering items such as social care, either in homes or in a residential setting, whether they're school meals catering services or cleaning and catering services in hospitals. I would love to be able to sit here today and tell you exactly who has been so heavily impacted by the policies of successive UK governments to privatise public services using the legislation that James has outlined in his presentation. But the reality in the UK is that there is no data that exists to effectively show the impact of outsourcing in terms of numbers of workers that have been outsourced, or even the gender equality impact on those outsourced workers. And this is even though outsourcing has taken place for decades in the UK. However, given the fact that many services that are outsourced that we come into contact with include cleaning, catering and social care, in the UK, this type of work does have high numbers of female workers and also a significant number of black workers. Not having the statistics to accurately identify the imbalances of a policy of this scale across so many decades is absolutely of fundamental economic importance, and by not having that, I think that's negligent. Unless we can shine a light on the inequalities affecting our low-paid women and black workers, we cannot highlight and amplify to policymakers the changes that are needed and the urgency of policymakers to implement those significant changes. It's this hidden inequality that's led in successive failures to act at local and national level. It is my strongly held belief that in the UK context, that the policies that have been adopted to outsource public services have disproportionately impacted women and black workers, and that there's been a systematic removal of the rights to collective bargaining in the UK because of the complex legislation in place. James has outlined a lot about that, and I can only amplify James's previous presentation to say that the legislation in place in the UK and the myriad of parent companies and subsidiary companies that are there makes it incredibly challenging to tackle, even trying to get changes to pay on an annual basis or terms and conditions that seem to be arbitrarily changed by an employer at a single workplace. The European legislation around TUPE laws in the UK do protect workers' rights. However, they have been incredibly eroded, and in the UK system, it's only at the point of transfer that those rights are retained. Collective bargaining rights are not automatically transferred when contracts are outsourced. And this means that for many low-paid workers, they do not have a mechanism for their trade unions to negotiate collectively with their new employer, something that has been in place for the same workers when they were employed in the public sector. When I hear the term privatisation or outsourcing in relation to delivery of public services, this almost always leads to a feeling of loss. It's a loss to the community and wider society, who lose the rights to have services delivered in a way that meets their needs and not the needs of shareholders in global multinational corporations. It's the loss of accountability. No one elects the company delivering the services. Often contracts with these companies can be for longer than any elected official's term in office. Again, James alluded to some of our private finance initiative contracts that can last for up to 30 years. They are often for soft facilities management contracts. As a younger full-time trade union official, I remember campaigning actively against one of the first private finance initiatives in the UK, one that is still in existence 2 decades after the start of my career with the union. The service delivery is overseen by managers who are tested against service level agreements made decades ago and not against the needs of the community in the 21st century. It's also the loss of fundamental workers' rights. I spoke a moment ago about the removal of collective bargaining rights. And in the UK, our collective bargaining legislation is designed to make achieving formal recognition incredibly difficult in larger companies, as the first stumbling block is defining what a bargaining unit actually is, as well as who is in it, and do unions have the numbers, the density, to force companies around the negotiating table. All of this process is designed to take significant amount of time and resources away from the real issues of delivering bargaining on workers' pay, their rights, and their terms and conditions. In the last few weeks in the UK, the government has brought forward a procurement bill, which has seen a significant impact on public services pay, terms and conditions for both those who deliver in public services and those who work in supply chains. We've long campaigned in unison for changes in procurement in relating to public services and echo what our colleague from Unite said around the ways in which we would look to tackle that in terms of an in-source first approach. And certainly we'll be looking to work alongside our sister trade unions in the UK to try to make sure that we effectively campaign on any proposed regulation framework that the UK government would want to impose. Anything that is put in place needs to support local people through a network of inclusive, high quality and sustainable public services. This must be at the heart of any public procurement regime. Funding, upskilling, training of the workforce, recognition of collective bargaining, participatory local democracy, and a commitment to protect human rights, including in public procurement activities, are critical to the success of modernising our public procurement regimes. In terms of procurement and the pandemic, at one point in the recent COVID-19 pandemic, we could see that one of the best recruiters for UNISON was the Tory government. Scandal after scandal on procurement and failures of outsourced delivery providers, whether in social care or delivering PPE contracts, highlighted the need for a real change in public spending. Outsourced workers faced significant challenges during the pandemic. Many did not see any increase in pay during this period. Initially, no access to decent sick pay was in place, and people were working alongside colleagues in UK hospitals facing the same risks with potentially less access to the correct protective equipment and for significantly less income than if they were directly employed by the NHS. Sorry, you can just hear the, it's not me, I don't need to evacuate the building. So other outsourced workers delivering school meals, working in universities or working in leisure services were being furloughed. And that's a system in the UK where those not able to work during the lockdowns had income supported via government payments. However, we saw companies that were receiving 100% funding from government for services that they were not delivering during the pandemic, were not supporting furloughs by providing 100% subsidy of their salaries. The pandemic highlighted a reliance on public services for day-to-day living, and it was UNISON and Unite members that were at the front line. Members providing public services in the UK today find themselves in a cost of living crisis that won't wait for politicians to act. The outsourced workforce that were seen as key to delivering services during the pandemic on the front line are now on the breadline. The multinational corporations that employ them are more concerned with profits for shareholders than the pay of their workers. It's not only about the money you take home, it's often worse sick pay, less annual leave, and worse pension provision for many outsourced workers, particularly where there is a two-tier workforce, and that legislation can be different around the UK and wherever you live. UNISON's seen a real significant shift across public service commissioners to bring services back in-house, as the public has become increasingly aware of the profits being made by companies that fail to deliver. There's a tide of public opinion starting to shift, and some devolved nations in the UK have made significant policy shifts to deliver social care services in-house. There's a significant amount of partnership working across Cymru Wales with a Labour government to deliver much more insourcing, for example. Like Unite, UNISON has been running organising campaigns to insource workers, and they've been very much targeted at local level, highlighting fundamental issues that have caused private companies reputational damage. Like Unite as well, we've targeted those commissioning bodies, whether it's the NHS, local government or a university, showing how companies are extracting profits at the expense of service delivery. One of these examples is social care, and I will draw attention to some of the interesting information from the CHPI report. And it's that report showed that, and it took place in 2019, that showed that across just 26 of the largest care home providers in the UK, a total of £261 million of the money that these companies received from the public sector to provide care was going towards repaying debt and not actually delivering care for most vulnerable people in the UK society. Out of that amount of money, £117 million, that was 45% of those payments, were going directly to parent companies, related subsidiaries. And that's a well-known way of avoiding tax and hiding profits. In some circumstances, assets such as a physical building that's probably built by taxpayers in the first place are transferred to the new private company. And then what the private companies are doing is they are mortgaging that, creating a debt where there's no need to. They get the building for free to a subsidiary company. And it's the repayments of those debts that are made from the contract with the commissioning body. And if the care home provider subsequently goes into liquidation, and we've seen that an awful lot, some of the biggest care home companies in the UK have gone into liquidation. The subsidiary company who's mortgaging the property, they're actually one of the major creditors first in line to get their monies repaid if the business is dissolved or resold. So it's almost like a win-win-win for those. Now, it might seem all doom and gloom, but it really isn't. And again, as James has quite rightly said, by organising workers, we've started to see successes, such as those that have been outlined previously, by campaigning, by making sure we're visible, by highlighting injustices and by showing reputational damage. It's by using what legislation we do have when it's appropriate, either to break contracts or to push for recognition where we're in a position to do so. And it's about having those industrial disputes. It's about making sure that workers on the ground know that they are not alone, they're supported by their trade union, and that they have the power to disrupt. And all power to James's colleagues who were recently on strike, and I didn't get my bins emptied, but I was all right about that. I'm cool. I knew it was all in the right interest. But it is about also, as James also outlined, the political pressure. It's really important that we get people on those organisations elected to positions, but also press those politicians, press the MPs in marginal seats, press the councillors who are making these decisions, highlight to the NHS trusts, and utilise the press and media locally to push the argument. And that's worked really well. We've seen significant successes, and particularly in NHS trusts. They seem to be ones that will be interested in bringing things back in-house. And UNISON successes, Unite successes have both been driven by the ability to deliver reputational damage. And that's sometimes driven by financial forensic investigations like the one of CHPI, and putting those political pressures onto those that commission services. In the UK and across the globe, I'm sure that you've all been speaking about it before I joined the meeting, we need a legislative structure with public sector delivery at its heart. In the UK, we have seen innovative and agile insourcing campaigns by activists where services have been outsourced, organising workers who can highlight areas such as years of no pay increases to ensure that commissioners of public services are aware of the impact of low pay and the failings of public sector companies to deliver the services that they say they're going to. And also to ensure the public understand that public money is being extracted, their taxes, and press local politicians to reconsider decisions and hold contractors to account, and bring back contracts in early, or ensure that re-tendering processes include bringing services back. So James has referenced the outsourced staff working in facilities management employed by Serco across 5 hospitals in East London. Similarly, another 400 staff also employed by Serco in North Lanarkshire NHS Trust have announced that they're going to be back in-sourced. That was announced last week. And in Neath Port Talbot, there's a council that decided that their indoor leisure services will once again come back under the local authority control after more than 20 years of being run by Celtic Leisure. And all of that has been achieved through local union organising on the ground, taking on local campaigns and delivering quite substantive wins. We're also hearing anecdotally that a number of school catering contracts are the contractors won't re-tender in the future because they can't make the contracts pay. Now we're going to keep an eye on that in terms of, and again, as James alluded to, the need to be more forensic in tracking contracts. But I think that piece of data, other than Freedom of Information Acts, which can take a long time to pull together, I think that's something that we do need to probably do more research on. So we may not be getting insourcing immediately, but we are taking action, including strike action, to improve pay, terms and conditions. Where we don't have formal recognition, we will still go into dispute. This has highlighted the hypocrisy of the way workers are treated and forced changes to be made by large multinational corporations that have ultimately decided not to re-tender, or the commissioning body has taken the right decision to bring staff back in-house. We have industrial disputes on pay that highlight the issues facing our members, and where we organise, we deliver better terms and conditions, as well as highlight areas where private contractors are failing. They're failing our workers, they're failing our commissioners, and they're failing our communities. The work we are doing in this area will, I hope and believe, will deliver one of the U-turns that we as trade unionists are waiting to see happen as quickly as possible. Thanks, Daria. Thank you.